So Canada's C-9 bill is open to interpretation. What it does is it lists that certain what we would call free speech is a crime if and only if the person, or at least a part of this bill, if the person is acting out of some kind of malice or hatred to a certain level, then it's deemed as a hate crime versus if they're stating something plainly. So, in other words, they have to determine what is the internal mental state, aka whether or not something is a thought crime before determining whether or not somebody has broken the law. And I mean, as a precedent, that is, again, mind blowing. Most of the time, these lawmakers are lawyers by training, and they know, the language, the way it's crafted. They understand the nuances of this. It's not done by accident. They know what kind of power they're giving themselves, the government, the system, by crafting the language of this law. And having to determine the internal mental state of someone in order to determine whether or not they have broken the law, that is, like, obviously tyrannical, right? So, in other words, you're giving the government, you're giving the system the interpretive power of what your mental state is. See, the common person thinks that that they could do that. They know a certain person. They're familiar with certain people. They know the patterns of their emotional states, and so they make that determination. People look at the government like it's the same way. Like the government can make such determinations, and not realizing that the government is this impersonal juggernaut that really can't make that determination so easily, right? It's the same thing when people assume that the government is charitable through the welfare system, assuming that the government would distribute welfare in the same way that the individual would distribute charity. And we know that's not the case. You got so much fraud with the welfare system, and there's a lot of social dislocations that produces. That's why it's always better to err on the side of less government. That not that there should be a law, but rather, can we manage this without the government input? And the answer is almost always the latter. It's almost always that individuals can assess what is going on a lot better than some impersonal system with a handful of people that are determined to gain the system, try to get as much power over the common people in which they don't feel really any kinship. So anyway, yeah. Interesting stuff. I talked before about the UK and some of the stupidity and craziness that comes out of that. And I said that it follows in the direction of where the UK is like the tip of the spear, as of Western Europe in general, but the UK seems to be the worst. And then it goes to the Commonwealths after that: Canada, Australia, New Zealand. They're like the next ones that this falls to the insanity. The United States lags behind that, but it's a lesson, right? I'm just hoping that people realize what's going on and more meaningfully oppose this type of stuff. You gotta look at your so-called leaders and not vote for them if they're coming from the Epstein class, essentially. But we need a change in philosophy, and I think we need a change in people's circumstances enough before people actually, quote unquote, wake up and realize the danger that they're in. But I hope by then it's not too late.